Hello everyone. Thank you so much for stopping by Sewing Machine Rehab today. We are continuing our Singer 301 restoration series, and this is the first video where we will actually start to reinstall parts back onto the Singer 301. I always start with reinstalling the rotary hook assembly. And I have it laid out here, all the different parts that we'll be using today in this video. But before we start, I want to talk with you all about when you take your hook assembly apart and you clean it and then you go to put it back together, some of the things that you should look at before you start putting it back on your machine. So, first part that I always check out is this loop guard, or some people call it a thread loop guard. This sits on the back of the rotary hook assembly, and it's on the shaft here like this, whoops, all the way in the back. The thread travels in between this part and the back of the rotary hook. As this is spinning around, a couple things can happen. Thread can get bunched up in here, but generally the thread is getting bunched up because something has happened to the surface here that has made it rough or jagged. That is probably a needle strike. So if something's off on your machine and the needle's moving up and down and this is spinning around, it's not uncommon to see right here little marks and scratches, which can actually be rough to the touch. So it's important that you address that before you put this back together. There are several ways you can do it. Typically, you're going to only find them here on the top. So if you look at where this hole is, you're going to normally see them up here. And I think it's just because if your timing's set properly, when this is spinning around like this, the needle's coming down right at that point. So if that has happened in the past on your machine and the needle has caused some pocking or scratches or damage, if it's too rough, you risk the chance of thread getting caught in here again in the future. So what can you do to fix it? Well, you can use a very fine grit sandpaper. And when I say fine, I mean like 600. And it's just something you gently want to rub over it to remove any burrs that you might feel, any roughness. It's never going to look the same again. There's just no way to put metal back or to totally reshape that metal. But you can smooth it out. Don't totally flatten this here. You'll see there's this indentation that comes out. You don't want to flatten that away, but you want to sand off as much of the roughness as you can. So, and I had to do that on this one. So this part's, once it's on the machine, this will be facing me, and the back side where the part numbers are will be facing the rest of the machine. The other part that you'll want to check out is the actual hook itself, because that can also have needle strikes. So this is spinning around and it's catching the thread, and that's how you get your lock stitch. But if there are burrs, and we're not talking about the jib, this part that can move back and forth, this little arm, we're talking about the hook itself. If there are burrs on this, that can also catch your thread, and then you can have issues with it binding up. So the best thing to do is just to rub your fingernail or a razor blade at an angle over this tip around every side and make sure it's not catching anywhere. If it is, the same treatment, and I would say minimal rubbing, just a little bit at a time, and then check it until you feel like that rough spot or the burr has been removed. And then that part's good to go. You can also inspect these parts for rust. Generally, I don't have them rust, but it has happened. You want to check the threads where the set screws are going to go. Check down inside the hole that is going to mount onto the shaft. Make sure there isn't any rust. Check inside the race here where the bobbin case base is going to sit. Make sure there's no rust. If there is, you can treat it. Just make sure you wipe that rust remover off really quickly. Don't leave it sit. It will change the color of this. I don't know if it's chrome plated or what, but don't leave the rust remover on there for very long at all. Then check the bobbin case base. That's the one that has this little finger. And check inside the little teeth here. And just make sure you got any of the old impacted lint and dust out, because these little teeth are actually designed to hold oil. This is going to spin. Once it's set properly in the race, it's going to be staying stationary, and the hook's going to spin around it as your machine sews. So that needs lubrication, and those little teeth are to hold that little bit of oil that it needs. So make sure they're cleaned out so they can do their job. Then just go over your screws. This is stuck in here now. I'll have to get it out in a moment. But go over your screws. Make sure you don't have any rust on your screws. And also you can check the hinge here on your bobbin case itself. Water can collect here if you didn't dry it quickly enough. And I have seen a little bit of rust forming inside these before. Now this looks like it's dirty inside, but it's not. It's just discoloration in the metal. So I've made sure that it's nice and clean, and if you had rust here, of course, you would just treat it and wipe it off really quick. So once you've went over your parts and you know that everything is working properly, then you can start to reassemble your rotary hook assembly. And the thing that I like to do first, I'm just going to remove the bobbin case base for a moment, is go ahead and install this loop guard back onto the back side of the rotary hook. And what you just need to remember when you do this, I always would get confused initially. The part number is always facing you. You can see it. If you put it on and the part number, you can't see it anymore, then you have it on wrong. So part number, which is this little part number right here, and I think it says 170128, that goes right onto the back of the hook. So I like to oil them up a little bit, and I have a little paintbrush and a tiny dish with some oil in it, and I'm just going to put a little bit of oil on this part down inside where it's going to fit onto the shaft, and inside the holes where the set screw is going to go. Now that I've done that, I can go ahead, part number out, and then when I set this on here, there's only one hole that screw is going to fit into, and it's threaded. It's right up here by the tip of the hook. So that's the hole that I'm going to line up with the hole on the loop guard itself. And once I get it fit on there nice and snug, I can take my screw, and we have 4 screws we're paying attention to. Our 2 set screws, which are down here, and then a very small screw and a screw that's a little bit bigger. This one that's a little bit bigger, that's the one that goes into the loop guard to attach it to the back. And just find the screwdriver that works best for you. I like to take these little magnetic ones, and they're a little fidgety, so you might not get it done on the first try, but just do it somewhere where if the screw flies off, it doesn't fall on the floor or into your trash can, which has happened to me, as I've said. And just tighten it up, and there you put your first part back onto your rotary hook assembly. The next thing that we'll do is we'll go ahead and take the bobbin case base, and we want to install it back into the rotary hook assembly. And I'm just going to put some oil right here on this race where that travels around. And then I'm also just going to run a little bit of oil around these teeth here. And then I will make sure that my jib is open, swung out, and I'm just going to set this in, and it just takes a little bit of spinning and twisting to get it seated into the race properly. And you'll know once it's seated properly in, it should go all the way around without popping out. So now it's in. I can close up the jib. The jib holds it in the race. And once that's done, I'm going to take my very tiny screwdriver and just put this on. And maybe not the first try. Nope. Doesn't want to do it. Let's see if maybe I can start it with my fingers. Sometimes just starting it with your finger is the way to go, and it may take you a few tries to get it done. Once I get it started with my finger, then it's easier to go ahead and tighten it up with the screwdriver. And if this took you a couple tries to get the screw seated in the hole so you could actually screw it in, then you especially want to go ahead and check that bobbin case base to make sure that it didn't come unseated out of the race. So now what I'm doing is I'm spinning it around. It doesn't pop out. It spins freely. I know that I have it put together properly. So now this is going to go back on the machine. The bobbin case base never moves, but the hook is actually what's going to spin around on the shaft like that. So what we have left is the 2 set screws that go into the rotary hook assembly once it's on the shaft. So here's my tip for you. There is a flat spot on our shaft, and I will change the sewing machine to a different position before we start putting it on. But I want you to find on your hook assembly the hook, the hook point right there, if you can see it. Then flip it over, and you see this hole that's closest to the hook point. Ignore that one, flip it over, and find the other hole. Go ahead now and install the set screw into this hole. This is going to help you out a lot because it's hard to put these in sometimes. Just putting a little bit of oil. So I'm looking, I have my hook point and the hole closest to it. I'm going to the one that's the furthest away, and I'm going to go ahead and get that screw started into my hook assembly before I put it on my machine, because we're going to be working from the underside and it is not easy. Do not put it all the way in. You do not want that set screw showing at all, because this still needs to slide onto the shaft. So if it's down too far, it's going to keep it from sliding on the shaft. Oil your shaft, and then we're going to turn the machine over and work from the underside for the rest of this. Okay, so now we're looking at the underside of our 301, and here is the shaft that I'm talking about. The hook slides onto this post right here, the end of the shaft. Take the counterbalance between your fingers and spin it around a couple times, and you'll notice there's that flat spot right there. So the set screw that we didn't put in is going to set on that flat spot. A good way to know if you're in the right place is that you should see there are 3 screws that almost line up perfectly. Here, here, and here. Your flat spot will always be right there when those 3 line up. Now, I oiled the shaft and the inside of the hook assembly, so it should slide on with no problem. I'm going to find my hole on my hook assembly, and I'm just going to slide it onto the shaft like that. If you look right now, you can see the edge of this flat spot up at the top of the hole. That's not right. This isn't right either. Now I can see the edge of the flat spot at the bottom. I want it to be centered right on the flat spot itself. So see, I let go, it spun back. Also, you want to make sure that you have pressed the hook assembly all the way up against this part right here. If you have a gap that is right there, then it's not pressed all the way on. It needs to be all the way on because there is just this tiny little space that the needle's going to go down inside, and if you don't have it in the right spot, the needle's going to hit the hook assembly and you're going to break a needle, and you probably should have been wearing safety glasses, so you don't want that to happen. So once you have the hook pressed all the way onto the shaft, then you can start the super fun process of installing that set screw back in. And I do not know if I will get it on the first try. So I think I can do this hopefully without blocking the camera too much. Okay, so once the hook has been set on, I'm going to do my best to keep it turned so it is right centered on the flat spot, and I have my set screw on my screwdriver, unless it falls off, which that will happen to you. I tried this more than once and I just realized, okay, I can't film this without maybe dropping the set screw, so hopefully I won't drop it more than a couple times. But I'm just trying to get that set screw started into the hole, which, whoops, it is. Okay, now I can go ahead and make sure before I tighten it that I have lined up all these screws. They should be in alignment. That is how I'm going to know that I remained on the flat spot of the shaft. And then I can tighten it down. If I'm just a little bit off, sometimes it will sort of seat itself and I'll feel the hook move a little bit forward or backwards. But generally, you have to eyeball these screws. And I'm also applying pressure onto the hook. So as I'm screwing the set screw in, I am not pulling the hook away off of the shaft. And then just snug it up. Once it's on and it's snug, you can spin it around and go ahead and tighten up the other set screw. Okay, so that's it. It's on. There's no gap in here. I don't have a gap. It's pushed all the way up against the shaft as far as it will go, and it won't spin on its own, and it's on the flat spot. So that is how you reinstall the hook. Now, I'll flip this back around. I don't want to get ahead of myself and everyone else in the reassembly, but I just want to point out something that I have noticed before. I had someone send me a machine and there was something wrong with it. It wouldn't stitch properly and they could not figure out what was wrong. As soon as I took it out of the box and I looked at the hook end, what I saw was this little finger was hanging like this. So if you remember, on the underside of your needle plate there are two little parts that come down, and this little finger, it should always be sandwiched perfectly in between those two little parts. This bobbin case base never spins. The hook assembly spins around it. So all the stitch problems that someone was having was because they had taken off the needle plate, probably cleaned out lint and things like that, and then they screwed it back on, and when they did that, they neglected to put the finger in between those two little parts. That's all that was wrong with the machine. So I hope this has been helpful to you. We do this first because when we put our needle bar back in and we install our presser bar and all of that, we're going to check the hook timing itself. So for me, it just makes the most sense. I'm going to put the hook on first. If you have questions, please let me know. Leave them in the comments below. I hope that you didn't get lost the last week or so. I have had a lot of construction going on at my house, and I've been babysitting a grandbaby, and it's just been a little bit crazy, but I'm so excited to get back to this. So I hope you will continue to follow along, and we will see you again very soon. Have a good day. Thanks for watching. Bye.